Starting Siman Kufayin Aleph. Sorry for the delay, 2 weeks, but we'll go through it. Some of the Nekudas in Siman Kufayin Aleph we're going to be going through today, and then we'll do another 2 shiurim on Kuf, 1 or 2 more shiurim on Kufayin Aleph, some of the sugis that are relevant. And we have another 1 more shiur in Hilchos Gittin, and we're going to move into Hilchos Pesach. Kufayin Aleph begins a new topic, in a new subtopic in these halachas, which continues until pretty much the beginning of Kufayin Hey, until Sif Daled, and that is the dinim of chalukas shutfus, of dividing something which you own as partners. Up until the Siman, we mainly dealt with questions of shutfim which had something which they did not divide, and how to deal with something which is owned as a partnership but is not divided yet. And there was a little bit of discussion about things which have to be divided, chalukah, but over here we're going, Kufayin Aleph is mainly dealing with what things that you are going to do dividing. And the discussion is, how do you define a shutfus? How do you define what can be divided, and how do you define the size that something could be divided, the quantity of something that could be divided, and when could somebody force somebody else to divide something which is owned as a partnership, or that was giyashent as a partnership. The definition of partnership we're not going to get into now, but we're going to go into what is the dinim of dividing something. And again, as the rest of the topics, most of the topics that we learned so far this year, we're going to be learning, these are topics which come up very often, specifically because people go into business deals with great intentions, or some people yashin things or buy things together, and not everything ends up the way you originally planned to, and then they end up in front of a Rav or in front of one of you to determine how we're going to dissolve this in a peaceful manner, or not so peaceful manner, depends on what point they come to you. So the Siman opens up, I mean by now all of you already know it, but the Siman opens up with shutfim in a piece of land. And how did they become shutfim? This either the Mechaber lists a whole list of ways how they became shutfim. Either Reuven had the full big field and Shimon bought a half of a field from him, or Reuven and Shimon bought together a field from somebody else, or the Reuven and Shimon yarshened it together. They were both sons of the owner of the previous property, or they both received it as a present, or they both took it by force from Hefker, whichever way they chose to take this piece of karka. And now they want to split it, or they have to split it for whatever reason. And if there is din chalukah, one person can go and force the other ones to divide it. Whatever din chalukah is, we're going to see soon. And if there is no din chalukah, you cannot divide it. And the Mechaber says the same thing applies to things which are metaltalin, things which are movable. That means that there is a concept of din chalukah, there's a concept of things which could be divided, things which cannot be divided, and that applies whether it is yesh din chalukah, whether it is metaltalin, whether it is karka, whether it is a house, a land, a field, anything that has value. There's a discussion if it could be divided or it cannot be divided. Now what happens if they are shutfim in a shtar choiv, there's a debt from somebody, and you cannot really cut the shtar choiv in two, or have the choiv being owed to 2 people, this person should owe each person half due to the legalities of the way this shtar choiv was structured. So the Vayalakat Yosef over here points out, based on Hilchos Alva, and Hilchos and Siman Samach Vav, and Siman Kuf Vav, that in such a case, one person, if you cannot divide it, obviously you could say good yogod, even if it is a shtar choiv, and you could just transfer the debt from one to another, which is interesting how you could sell something which is not really feasible, is not really valid or existing yet, but since it's a shtar choiv, there is a way to sell a choiv. So over here, you'll do good yogud on the value of whatever is remaining of the choiv, and there are ways of calculating how much a choiv is worth. The Vayalakat Yisrael Shulchan Aruch doesn't go into it, but today there's people who will calculate to you how much your choiv is actually worth, even though it says in the paper that you're owed $100,000, it might not be worth as much as it says in the paper. Now, what is the fact that Mechaber lists a bunch of formats how these two people yashin, and there is a din chalukah there, and you could split it. The Smeh points out that the reason why the Mechaber lists all these ways is because we're talking about chalukah. We're not going into the concept of what happens if there is no chalukah, if there's good yogud. The Mechaber and Sifaf only discusses din chalukah, and this only discusses din chalukah, so it lists to you Yerusha, buying together, matana, taking everything, all these. But if we would go into the discussion of good or yogud, over there is a machlokes if good or yogud applies also to shutfim, or it applies only to Yerusha. That means, does it apply to two people who decided to go into a partnership together? Does it apply only to two people who were forced into a partnership, and then the concept of good or yogud, the takana of good or yogud kicks in? Happens to be, if you look at Rabbi Akiva Eiger, we're not going into a discussion about which way to go into it. Rabbi Akiva Eiger points out from the Knesset Agdela, which brings the Ranach, that if you had two koinim, two people who bought it, and they gave it b'Yerusha, so if you're going to go into the svar, if you're going to follow those that say that there is no good yogud by mechira, there's only good by buying together, by shutfim is only good yogud by Yerusha. So the Rabbi Akiva Eiger just points out to you that the Yarshim who are Yoirish from the Koinim don't have more schusim than the Koinim that they're coming. So since the Koinim could have not demanded good yogud, as shutfim, the Yarshim of each Koinim, that means Reuven and Shimon bought, and then the next generation one of each, and they got into a fight. They cannot demand good yogud. That's again something which is in machlekes, and it really boils down to what is the logic behind good yogud versus din chalukah, which we're going to get to hopefully soon. We're going to get to soon. Now, the Rama points out that if something has din chalukah and they made a kinyan between them, that they're not going to make a chalukah between them, despite the fact that there is din chalukah, they cannot go ahead and change change their mind now and say we do want chalukah. Rabbi Akiva Eiger adds to it, if one person rents out to the other person his half, that means two own it together, and one person says, I'm going to rent to you my half for a certain amount of time, obviously he cannot come and do good yogud while the rental is still in effect. He could do good yogud afterwards. Now, although they make a kinyan, they made a kinyan now that they're not going to be dividing something which has the potential to be divided. This is from the Rashba, and the Smeh right away says, and the Rashba says it's not that there's no issue of kinyan dvarim. Why is there no issue of kinyan dvarim? The Rashba himself explains it because it's not that I made a kinyan, I'm not going to be cholik, because that kinyan would obviously have no validity that I'm going to make a kinyan not to do something. By me, this is we discussed a few semanim ago, by me making a kinyan with you of chalukah, it's not that I'm committing to not do something, I'm makna to you the rights to use my property. So I own half, you own half, I'm makna to you the rights to use my property, you're makna to me the rights to use your property. So it's not a kinyan of not to do something, rather it's a kinyan of me giving you the rights to use the property, usage rights, and that kinyan is not a kinyan dvarim, it's a kinyan on actual karka, a kinyan on something that does have the strength to fall. It falls on something.
Well, your karka hasn't been defined yet. It's not like a particular karka, right? We're sharing it. We're shifting it. It's not like I point to this karka and I'm macking the use.
Yes, I'm macking to you all my rights. You could use all my rights in this shared karka. Again, like I told you, there's a discussion, how do you define shutfus? Shutfus before there is a defined part, each person owns everything. Every person owns everything. Until you do a chalukah, every person owns everything, unless there's some form of division in place without a border. But if there is no division in place, and obviously there is no border, so everybody owns everything. The shutfim all own everything. Whether it's 50-50 or 30-70, or whichever way they divide it, but they all own everything. So if I make a kinyan with you, I'm not going to be chaylik. What I'm saying is that although I have rights now to go everywhere, but these rights are only rights as of now, by me making a kinyan to you, that I'm committing, not only committing, that I'm giving you all rights that I have in this area, and you're giving me all your rights, it means that each one of us becomes 100% owner. Rather than each one of us 50% owner, each one of us 100% owner. So the shutfus remains a shutfus. But instead of it being a shutfus that could be divided, it becomes a shutfus, each one's 100% owner. And they cannot be split. Now, we mentioned that the Shach says it, and the Smelser says it, it's something that there are Yeshemrim, that by Shutfim you cannot say good or good. Just as a side thing, the Knesset Agdela points out that whoever says good or good becomes the Moitzi Mechavere, right? Because he's the one who wants to split, and he's the one who wants to take from from the other person the half. So he becomes the Moitzi. And the person who is the other Shutef, who did not initiate the good or good procedure, is the Muchzak. So, not the Muchzak, is the Mechavere, Moitzi Mechavere. And he becomes the Chavere, the Muchzak. So the Moitzi is the one who has to bring it on, yeah? The other one remains a Muchzak. The Muchzak, you could say Kimli. So if any scenario where the second person has a right to there is an opinion which will work in his favor, that he could block a good or yagud, that he could bust a good or yagud, the Knesset says he could use it, because he is the muchzak. The other person is the Moitzi, you could say Kimli. The Knesset says Kimli in a bunch of places. The whole Knesset brings it, yeah. Now, so what does it mean that a shutfim can't say good or yagud? What is the logic behind it? So you look in the Avnei Choshen. He says, what are we talking about shutfim over here? It doesn't mean two shutfim that bought a property, they're going to live there. It means two, obviously, and this also seems like that's what Shulchan explains, we're talking about two shutfim, they bought a property or some kind of something for the purpose of business, that they want to rent it out to people. They bought together a building, or they bought together a big chotzer, and they want to rent it out. So now, what happens is that, let's say they bought this big house that they want to rent out. And then Reuven's house burnt down the block. And he says, I want to come into, I own half of this investment property, I want to move into there. And I want to live there. But now, if I want to live there, I have no patience to see you and who you're renting the whole time. I want to go to Yagud. So then, he wants to come and say, good Yagud. So over there, the Avnei Choshen says, there is a svara to say, you could say good Yagud. Because the whole point of not saying good Yagud is when the original idea was only for a business venture. So when it's a business venture, our goal is that we both should be making money out of it. That's why we joined. But if it's no longer for a business venture, I could say, good, oh yeah, good. He says, well, what happens if you don't buy it for long-term investment? You actually buy it for a short-term investment. You buy it to flip because you want to make money on it afterwards. So nobody could say good yagud. Why? Because if it's going to wait a little bit longer, and then you're going to be able to make more money off it. So one person is going to say, why should I sell out now if I'll wait another 6 months? Because the original plan was that we wanted to buy this house. It's in a good deal now for 800. And it's going, and we're waiting for the market to move in a certain direction, and we decided we're going to sell it when it's going to hit 1.5 or 2.5 or 3.5. And now you're giving me attitude, and you want to take it from me now at the current value. So I'm going to only make a few dollars off it, and you're going to hold on to it another 3-4 years. And you're going to make the whole profit. I'm not interested in doing that. Then the Khoshen says, you can't say that's when it should fit, you cannot say good yagud. Because the original plan was to have it long term. Elamai, he says, if after a certain amount of time you can't find a buyer for that price, then you could demand a good yagud. The Shulchan is pretty similar to that. And he says that when people buy something for the purpose of a business venture together, it's the same as Hisnu Shalei Lachlik. It's the definition of making a condition they're not going to split it.
This whole thing is only good the other, it's the regular chaluk also.
If they could say good,
If yesh within
chalukah, again, that's also, you can't, no, it's according to the Aruch HaShulchan, no, you can't say, there's no chalukah. It's Hisnu Shalei Lachlik. If I buy with you a partnership, the Aruch HaShulchan goes a step further. The Khoshen says that you can't say good yagud in business deals, because it's much better if you're together. The Aruch HaShulchan says not only can't say in business deals, good yagud, you can't say chalukah. When I go into a business partnership with you and buy something, it's like Hisnu Shalei Lachlik, because that's the purpose of the business deal. And it's mashma if it's up to a certain price point. Obviously, it's not Leilam Vod. It's not that they went into partnership with Leilam Vod. They went into partnership until we make a certain amount of money. At that point, that's when they could sell it. Now, if they did not, now back to the Avnei Choshen, if they did not buy it for the purpose of business, but they actually bought it for the purpose of living, they bought the house together, each one's going to have one floor of it, or half of the house, and they can't live with each other anymore. So then you could have said maybe there's no good yagud because they were not Yiddish. So the answer is, even though it's mashma, maybe you cannot say good yagud. If you look in the Pischei Tshuva on Sif Hey later on, brings in the Chasam Sofer that the concept of good yagud you could say even by koinim, because if the whole idea of good yagud was established if there is going to be a fight between two people and they can't handle somebody else, then that's the concept, and there's no chalukah, then that's the concept of good oy agut.
So you three conditions. You should have bought it to live together.
Yeah.
And it should not have to be chalukah.
Yeah.
And
what?
You said three conditions, and I mean that it should be.
They bought it. They can't win according to the Chasam Sofer.
Yeah.
Chasam Sofer says you can't say good. You could say good yagud because that's the whole point. You could say good yagud even in such a scenario. Even when they bought it, he's chaylik on this, and he says you could say good yagud even when they bought it together, and they weren't Yiddish. I'm saying according to Chasam Sofer, it's obviously talking about not in business, and every other kind of shutfas. You could say good yagud even by shutfas according to Chasam Sofer, because that was the reason why good yagud was established as a takana. It was a takana to solve shalom bayis problems between partners. The Avnei Choshen says completely disagrees with it, takes the opposite approach, and he says, I don't understand the logic behind it. He says, good yogud is the opposite of normal business transaction. It doesn't make sense. The whole concept of good yogud doesn't make really sense. The idea of good yogud is the Chachamim made a takana for a scenario when you had no choice and you couldn't get along. Why? But you didn't choose your partner. You got stuck with it. If you chose your partner, you can't say good yogud after, because that's not the normal way of business. It doesn't make sense that one person should go into business for the purpose of buying out the other one and forcing him out.
One of the cases, if you bought a good yogud, is that you bought a half of the house. No, isn't that one of the cases of good yogud?
If you what?
Saying one of the cases with the first halach on the
that's din chalukah. The question is if it's good yogud over there or not. That's what the Shach and the Smith says. It's love that it has nothing to do with good yogud. His din chalukah is one thing. Good yogud is something else. There's a discussion of good yogud. You could say or no, you can't say that.
If you could be chaylev, for sure you can do good yogud.
No. That's exactly what the Shach says. Now, the Kesef HaKotshim on Seif Vav, not on Seif Aleph, but still it's relevant to Seif Aleph, that he also discusses this concept of Shutfim could say good yogud or not. He brings what the Shach says in the name of the Ria Levi, that Shutfim, by Shutfim you don't say, I can't say, Shutfim they're bought together, it's not Shach, say good yogud. And he says that he had a discussion about this with a Shver, Shas Tshuvas Neta Shashuim. And he starts by saying, first of all, each person could say Kimli. Whoever it's worth it for could say Kimli to block a good yogud. Why? Because he doesn't want to lose his rights. If it's going to be good yogud, he might end up losing. He doesn't want to do this, he could say good yogud. And he says, and then the case of Koshin continues, that the Beis Yosef brings the Rashba, Beis Yosef mentions the Rashba later on in the Siman, that when one person buys from a Yerush, let's say you have two Yerushim, and one person, Reuven buys from, not Reuven, Yehuda buys from Reuven's Yerush. So since the others, when you have two Yerushim, so each Yerush could claim good yogud against the other Yerush, right? That's, Yerushim could claim good yogud. But now when you have somebody who bought from the Yerush, so does he get the same rights that the Yerush has that the person that he bought from also had? When he purchases the property, does he purchase with it whatever rights the seller also has? So he says that the Rashba brings, the Beis Yosef brings them in the Rashba, yeah, he yashens those rights that he has. So the Kesef HaKotshim says based on that, what does it mean? That means that the concept of good yogud is a concept which exists and is there for any scenario where the relationship is changed without the agreement of both. That means it's not that by koinim there is no good yogud, by Yerushim there is good yogud. It's the same, by Yerushim there's good yogud because they didn't choose to be partners. So the koine who bought from a Yerush, even though technically you could say that he chose to become a partner with that Yerush, but that Yerush didn't choose to become a partner with him.
Yerush could say good.
So because Yerush could say good yogud, so he could also say good yogud to the Yerush. Because one could say the other person could say to the other one. So he says based on that, being that when one person could say good yogud, automatically the other person could say good yogud against him. You can't say that good yogud will only work one way. The Kesef HaKotshim says you can't take a scenario where good yogud will only work from A to B, but not from B to A. If A to B still has the right to say good yogud, then B also has the right to initiate the good yogud against A. So therefore, if two shutfim were partners, and then one person bought from him, could be you could still say good yogud. Why? Because he says good yogud was takone because darke shalom. That's what the Chacham established good yogud. It was to prevent fights. And when two people buy together, they are buying together with the understanding that they're going to get along with each other, and not that they're going to work it out. They work out any issues between them and remain partners. And when a new person enters this relationship, even if he buys from the previous lekeach, it creates a new dynamic over here between the people. That original Tanai that existed between them, that we're going to get along and make peace, is no longer in existence. And therefore you can still say good yogud. Each person can say good yogud in such a scenario. So he says, even when you have two buyers together, really there should be no good yogud between them. But being that when one person is yoresh and when one person is buying from them, because of course he says any change in the relationship kicks in the option of saying good yogud to one, and being that it kicks the option to one, it also gives it to the second, or maybe to both. But it's always good yogud.
I don't get it. The first lekeach has good yogud only because he got it from the yoresh.
No, the first two people bought it together, they have no good yogud.
Right.
One of them sold it to somebody, or one of them died. The next generation, the next person, is no longer has the original agreement that he's going to get along with the first person. So this is good yogud kicks in.
No, but what's in the case where there's two yoresh, one yoresh sold a lekeach?
According to the Erech Shai, according to the case of HaKodshim, there's good yogud in any change of relationship between them.
What if another lekeach goes and buys from the second yoresh?
Doesn't make a difference. It doesn't make a difference. Why not?
Because now they both came in. When they both came in at different times, but they both came in with the understanding they want to stay.
Each one of them came in buying from somebody else without the understanding that they're going to be there. They didn't have the original agreement when they bought it together that they're going to make us work. They didn't get married to each other. They didn't commit to shalom bayis.
So two people that buy from one person
together, yes, that's when there's the kasvah. That's when they commit to get along with each other.
Let's say they didn't buy together. Let's say one bought half the house and someone else comes to buy the other.
Later,
from the same guy.
From the same guy. According to the case of Kochim, maybe there is a place to say good yogud even in such a case. He limits the concept of no good yogud to only scenarios when you entered with their agreement that you're going to get along with each other, which fits to what we said before according to the Aruch HaShulchan and according to Avnei Choshen, that regarding going into business partnerships, the idea of going into business partnership is that you're going to stay in it for the long term. But any change in a relationship doesn't work like that. The Erech Shai over here brings a similar interesting question. What happens if a Yid bought a business together with a guy? A Yid is a shutuf with a guy. And then the guy went and sold his chelik to a Yid. So now comes the first Jew who was a shutuf with a guy. And he's not interested in having another Yid as a shutuf. And could he go to the new Jew, and tell him, I'm not interested in you, good or good. So maybe, so he says, maybe according to the Shach, that shutfim you cannot say good or good. Maybe he cannot say good or good. Even though now the second Yid only bought it from a guy, but ultimately, right now, they're shutfim. So do we say good yogud or not? So he says, Erech Shai says that what he brings from the Zechor LaAvram in the name of the Eidos B'Yaakov, that this, even the people would say that there's no good yogud by shutfim. It's limited to only shutfim which bought together from somebody, similar to what we just said before. The same time, for the same person together or very close to each other. Not if Reuven bought now and Shimon bought a few months later, or some time later. He says, because then you could say Gudei Agud l'kulei alma. That's the Erech Shai says. And then Erech Shai goes into the whole discussion. What's the logic behind Gudei Agud b'chol? He says, what's the logic of those that say there's no good agud by shutza? Because he starts the discussion from the exact opposite from what we just said until now, from the way the Avnei Choshen looks at it. He says when somebody enters into a partnership, l'chayra, he enters into a partnership with the idea that he could say Gudei Agud afterwards. Because he knows Chachamim established Shutfus, and Chachamim established Gudei Agud. So if I'm entering this partnership, I'm entering it with the understanding that I'm a Yid, you're a Yid, we're both from Yid, and we have what the Shulchan Aruch gives us, the tools that the Chachamim gave us. One of them is Gudei Agud. So the Erech Shai says, no, punkt verkehrt. Gudei Agud is completely against the concept of how business operations should work. He says nobody agrees to enter a shutfus with the understanding that the hostile takeover could be imminent at any moment. That's not why you would agree to become a partner with somebody. It's called a hostile takeover for a reason. It's hostile, it's not friendly. I'm not entering, I don't become a shutuf with you, so you should take it away from me. I'm not going to invest money to get thrown out.
It's a two-way hostile takeover. You can take it from two.
Exactly, but he says, nobody wants to do that unless you're both vultures and you're going into the business in that way. That's a different category. That's not what the Shulchan Aruch is talking about, those people. It's the Kanas Chachamim to deal with Shalom Bayis problems. That's how he defines it, like Yerushim. But nobody for Shalom Bayis problems of people that did not plan to enter such a problem. And if somebody enters with that intention of doing Gudei Agud, he lost out on such a thing. Because it's not a normal way. The Erech Shai says it's not the normal way of doing business. So if somebody enters a partnership with the intention of being able to pull off a Gudei Agud, too bad. That's not how business is supposed to work. Avnei Choshen similar, yeah.
Just more of a common sense.
Yeah, and he says, and if they made a kinyan not to do this, I'm going to continue. The Erech Shai now just goes to the next topic. What happens if they made a kinyan not to divide? They made a kinyan to shaloi lachlik, and there is din chalukah, and then one person sells his chelik to somebody else. Yeah, does this continue weiter? So this is discussed in the Ulam HaMishpat. The Ulam HaMishpat says, look in Siman Kuf Ayin Vav, and look in Siman Shin Tazayin V'duk. That's what the Ulam HaMishpat says. What does it say? If you look in Kuf Ayin Vav Sif Yud, because what's the question that the Ulam HaMishpat was discussing? If two people made a kinyan not to there is din chalukah, make a kinyan not to divide. Does the kinyan survive or not? So he says, look in these two places. Look in Kuf Ayin Vav and look in Siman Shin Tazayin V'duk. It doesn't explain what. So if you look in Kuf Ayin Vav, what is saying Kuf Ayin Vav? Kuf Ayin Vav Sif Yud tells you when you have shutfim that become partners, don't change from minhag HaMedina. And if one person changes minhag HaMedina, then the hefsed is to him, and the revach is to both, because he was the Meshana. And see if you test over there in the same Siman Kuf Ayin Vav, it says if one shutif dies, the shutfus falls apart. Even if they made a deal that the shutfus is going to be, let's say, for 3 years, and in the middle of the 3 years, one of the shutfim die, the whole thing dies, and the Yoresh can't come in the place of his father and say, I want to continue shutfus. Why? Because the original shutf could say, I agreed to do business with your father. I didn't agree to do business with you. And Siman Shin Tazayin, it's talking about a rental. If two people rented a house together, and then one person wants to move out of middle and wants to bring in a different tenant instead of him. So the other person can say, I'm not interested in having another tenant, I didn't agree to have, I agreed to you, I didn't agree to the other person. So these are three places that the Ulam Mishpat says, based on this, you'll understand, Haduk, you'll figure it out what will be the din in the question that we have. Does the Tanai, that the Kinyan that Reuven did with Shimon about Ein Din Chaluk, is a survive or not? If you think about it, what's the idea for it is, if you compare it to Shin Zayin, it makes sense. I could tell a person, Reuven could tell Shimon's the next person, I made a Kinyan not to be l'shaloi lachlik with the guy who sold it to you. Because with him, I got along with you. I don't know if I'm going to get along with you or not. So the Kinyan, we could start negotiations now. Maybe I will make the Kinyan with you also. But you're not entering the relationship with a pre-existing Kinyan. Or you could, the same thing could also be brought from Siman Kufa and Vav. 1 second. Siman Kufa and Vav. That if one Shutaf is dead, then the whole Shutaf falls apart. So over here also, the Kinyan Shalai Lachlik is only dependent on the people who do it originally. Yeah.
You could even point into Zion, you could even prevent him from selling half it, no?
No.
Just like maybe it's scarce less.
No, Schus in the same house. Over here, there's Din Chalukah. The Pamoine Zov takes it a little bit simpler. It doesn't send you to look around for the Mekaymes. He says, as long as the people are alive, the Kinyan is in existence. If one sells this part or one moves out or whatever it is, then it's obvious that this agreement of Shaloi Lachlik expires at that moment, and each one could go ahead and sell. Each one could go ahead and force a division of the shutfus. And he brings a raya from Shas Chuvas Kerem Chemar that it doesn't go from one generation to the next generation, just like by shutfus. If one shutfus passes away, the shutfus is not continue to the next. The rights of the shutfus is not continue automatically to the next generation. But if two people bought from a karka from two separate shutfim, that's different. That's in Kufa and Gimel, that nobody could actually break it, because nobody could break up the shutfis, because over there, let's say Reuven and Shimon were shutfim, and then they sold it to Levi and Yehuda. Over there it's different. Over there you can't say that the shutfis falls apart, because each person has some form of kinyan on the other person's half. That's in Kufa and Gimel is going to be discussed. It's going to discuss later. However, this Pamoin Zav says, if you're going to look in Vayomer Yitzchak, he says that it does continue weiter. Why? Because the Vayomer Yitzchak says that the kinyan shalei lachloik. What's the assert of the whole kinyan shalei lachloik? Why does it apply? Because each person is makna schus to the other person in his karka. If you're makna the schus to somebody else in your karka, that schus that is purchased or that is acquired is attached to the land and continues weiter. The same way as in Kufa and Gimel, if two people buy from two shutfim, it continues weiter. So he says the whole logic of, otherwise, if it's the kinyan is not going to kick in. The only reason the kinyan kicked in is, like we said, because they're shutfim. Because each one's makna, the other one is schuyas in the karka. Those schuyas do continue weiter.
Why would you say that? Why would you say it goes by the person, not by the karka?
Uh-huh.
Why would you say that kinyan of schus goes by the person, not by the karka?
Because it's the kinyan dvarim. Kinyan shalei lachlik is a kinyan dvarim. Otherwise, well, I know if the kinyan shalei lachlik continues weiter or not. The kinyan shalei lachlik is not on the person. It's not a marriage.
You didn't have to
We
make a
should
kinyan,
look.
If they agreed to just do it together, they wouldn't have to make a kinyan.
Yeah.
One of the kinyan would go together.
Yeah. The Vayalakit Yosef brings over here from the Shas Chuvas Rashbash that if there were shutfim in such a way that each person had a clear Shas Chuvas Rashbash Siman Reish Samaches, if they're shutfim in such a way that each person recognizes and it's clear what each person's part is. For example, there's two houses and there's a chutzner, so each one knows what his house is, and the chutzner is where it splits. So now they want to split, and one person wants to do a good or yagud, force a good or yagud. Says you can't. One person cannot say force a good or yagud on the other person. That means each one bought a house. They bought this complex together, which has two houses and a yard in the middle, and now they don't get along. So one person wants to go and say, "I want to go to yagud. I want to take you out of your house." Why? Because the chatzar is shared, and maybe the chatzar is no din chalukah. So I'm going to do good yagud. I'm going to do good yagud in such a way that I'll also take over your house. That doesn't work, he says. Why? And he mentioned it. He says that's from the Shas Tuas Rashbash, and he says, and he adds, he says, if you look in Takva Shel Yosef, Siman Kufches and Chelik Bey Siman Kufches, over there, even if there were shutfim also in the houses, not only in the chatzar. The Rashbash is talking about their shutfim in the chatzar, but each one had his own independent house, and they was defined to each one's houses. But let's say there were shutfim in the houses also. Takva Shel Yosef Chelik Bey Siman Kufches. We still don't say good or yagud. Why? Because the houses you could split. The chatzar, which cannot be split, on that chatzar, since it cannot be split, you keep it as a shutfas because you can't say good or yagud because they bought it together. There's no more good or yagud. Good or yagud doesn't kick in anymore. It doesn't apply in such a scenario. Then the Mechader Ramah continues about the places and shuls, and if you look, there's a Piskei Mishpat over here which points out that based on the Ramah's discussion, if you could put a mechitza between two seats in shul, it's an interesting shaila. If there's parking spots in the place, the parking spots are narrow, and somebody doesn't like the fact that when you pull into the parking spot, you touch the other person's area, could he put a mechitza between them? He says, obviously you can't, because the reason why the parking spots are so close to each other, because each person is relying on the other person. It's like a place in shul. And that boils down to machlokes between the Shoshanas Yaakov and the Sivis. And the Sivis says the reason why you can't put a mechitza in shul between two seats, you could only put it on your own spot, is because the seats are made and it makes it doichak. So you do have a right to put a mechitza, but on your spot. Because it's just, the idea is not to have a mechitza which is going to cause the chak. The Shoshanas Yaakov says no, the mechitza is only needed, you need for self keganav. That doesn't apply bechlal in the seats in the shul. Seats in the shul, all you need is a marker that separates between the two places. There's no need for it. So based on that, this Piskei Mishpat says, based on that, it's a shaila regarding separating parking spots. If you have enough space to put a gate between the two parking spots, could you say that you could put up a gate or you can't put up a gate? It's going to make it uncomfortable for the other person.
In your own parking lot, you for sure put?
Huh?
In your property, you for sure put?
Lav dafka. It depends how it's done. Maybe, yeah, maybe not. If there's enough space or not.
Huh?
If there's enough space, yeah.
I'm saying enough space, but it's easier for the other person to go in if there's not.
If there's enough space, then you could in your own place, yeah. The Mechaber continues in Sif Beis and will say if you cannot divide it when there's no din chalukah, when there is no din chalukah, you cannot divide it. That's what we know from the previous Sif. It's only when each one is not makir chelkai, does not recognize his chelik. But if each person is makir chelkai, even if there is no din chalukah, you could force the other person to separate. Why? So there shouldn't be a hezek re'iyah. That's what it seems like. So the Smer right away says that even though the Mechaber over here clearly seems to follow that the idea of separation here is because of Hezek Re'iyah, it's the same thing would apply if for Chalukah when there is no Hezek Re'iyah. The only difference is, do you need a Mechitza or do you need just a border marker? And the Taz says that even when there is no Hezek Re'iyah, you still need a proper mechitza of 10 tfachim, because it's not only because of Hezek Re'iyah. Why? because you also have the issue Shlei Tafas Olav Keganev. So even if there is no Hezekriya, you still need a Mechitza. The Smeh says no, that you don't need a Mechitza unless there's a shadow of Hezekriya, you only need a border marker, and that's how and the Sivas HaMishpat only brings the Smeh, and that only brings a Smeh, which basically means that when there is no shadow of Hezekriya, you only need a border marker, you don't need a Mechitza, and the Aruch HaShulchan also paskins the same way. Now, what is Din Chalukah? How much is Din Chalukah? That starts in Sif Gimel Daled Hey. Maybe we'll get through some of them. We'll go through them quickly. In Sif Gimel, one of the things is, in Sif Gimel you have a few rules of Din Chalukah, and in Sif Daled, Sif Hey have a few rules of Din Chalukah. One of the things is, if you have that the person who's going, let's say the shutfim and one person, 5 shutfim and one person has a small sliver, and it has Din Chalukah. If after the division, the name of it, Shmoi Olav, will still keep the name that it had before. So a Chatzer will still be a Chatzer, a Gina, the sliver of a Gina will still be a Gina, etc. Then it still is, there is Din Chalukah. And for a Sadeh, what's for a Sadeh? For example, each one, Sadeh is a Daled, and in Chutz La'aretz, it's over there, it says it should be one enough to keep a worker busy a whole day. And the Smeh over there right away says, what does it mean? That you could be ma'akev even the smallest partner, what the Mechaber is trying to tell you here is, that even if you have one out of a bunch of partners, and that partner has the smallest part, and his part is the part that's not going to have Shmoi Olav, he could be ma'akev the Chalukah for everybody, at least in this scenario. And he also brings a Maram. If you're talking about a room, by a room you don't have to worry about the shear of Daled al Daled, by a room, because a room is made for storage, and storage even less than Daled al Daled still has the name storage still applies to something which is smaller than Daled al Daled, and you could divide a room even if it's less than Daled al Daled for each one. Now, why do you need by a field, by a Soda and Chutzlar, it's enough for a worker to be busy a whole day? Very simple, because that's a Smech says, because workers don't get hired for less than a full day of work. Nobody wants to go work for less than a full day, and that's the standard. So therefore, if you're going to divide a field in such a way that each person is going to only get enough to keep a worker busy for a half a day, they're both going to lose out of it. Why? Because he's not going to be able to, he's going to pay for a full day and only get a half a day out of it. And the Smeh continues and says, but if each person gets a day and a half worth of land, that means that the land that he gets is going to be a day and a half. He's still going to each one's going to end up paying for 2 days. That's fine. He says that's already, when it's more than 1 day, it's already enough. And he explains, it's explained much more in the Prisha, that it's ein l'davar soif. If you're always going to go, you're always going to continue weiter and weiter until you be able to fit the exact amount of time of work. No, it says what the Gemara says, that a day, it means at least 1 day of work. Not should be less than 1 day of work. But Taz brings a Sman, disagrees with him, and Taz says no. If you have, this field needs 3 days of work, each one's going to get a day and a half, it's not going to work. So Reuven will get the amount which is 1 day. Shimon will get an amount which is also 1 day. And the middle, which is between the two, is going to be, each one will get a half a day. That remains b'shutfus, and they get 1 day. There's no din chalukah in that one. The din chalukah is in the amount of time that it takes to work, not in the size. The size is only a raya for the din chalukah. The din chalukah is in the amount of work that it takes. So if it will be a day and a half and a day and a half, the middle becomes the category of en din chalukah. That's what the Taz says. And the Sivas brings both as not machriya. Interestingly, even though usually it's machriya like a smeh against the Taz, and the Avnei Choshen says machriya like the smeh, and says that if you look at the way the Smeh explained it in the Prisha, it's obvious that the kasha of the Taz doesn't hold any water. Now, so then the Ramah over here continues. If they have, before we get to the Ramah, let's go a few short examples of Shmoya love, and these examples are also going to apply to Sif Hey, which discusses if Sif Hey has a bunch of other rules. But let's give you a few examples. I don't have that much time. If two people are partners in a restaurant, yeah, and they have a kitchen, big kitchen.
Partners in what?
A restaurant or in a kitchen, and they're going to this chalukah. The kitchen's big, you could split it, but how are you going to do it in chalukah? In chalukah, the chayra would be, we're going to see later, it has to be shmaya love, at least for this sif. What's shmaya love? Each person should have the mahos, the name of a kitchen on it. If one person is only going to get the tiles without the sink, it's lav dafka sheyesh b'li din chalukah. It does not connect it to the water. Yeah, it's just an example. You can think of these examples. You see it also in Sif Hey, it also applies. And that you look in the Mata Shimon, yeah. What happens? The same thing with this same question would apply if you have a big room which only has windows on one side, some windows, or only has one big window. Could you split it? Somebody wants to be in a dungeon, a place that has no windows whatsoever.
And a house, we're going to say later either way.
Huh?
A house didn't know.
It's not a house. It's a business. What happens if do we bichlal go into the division based on how long it takes to work? Today, workers are not hired by the day always. It's not the klal like was then. And there is maybe there is a shaila. Maybe today this is different because the workers are not hired by that. Do we have to consider chalukah based on workers? It's a shaila. Not so clear what the din is. What the din is, huh?
If you hire them by hour, you know the only bar is for workers. So if you could hire workers,
If you hire by the hour, then you could do the chalukah much smaller already now.
okay, fine. So why can't you do it?
Maybe you could. That's what I'm saying. Is lav dafka you have to do for a full day because today they're hired by the but.
It doesn't say Eretz Yisrael on Chutzlar, it says Eretz Yisrael on Babel. Okay?
Now
Now we're like Eretz Yisrael. Pashas now we're like It doesn't say.
no, Eretz Yisrael is because each person has dalit. That's the minimum. Chutz la'aretz has to be useful for somebody. There has to be din chalukah and
What's Eretz Yisrael related to that?
but it's a similar way to Eretz Yisrael, I guess. It has the logic behind it is it has to be useful for somebody. When you do the chalukah, it has to be something which a person will be able to do something with it, not end up losing money, losing money from it. Yes, I think you could also think of a scenario: a person has a roof, and the roof, partners together in the roof, and the roof has solar panels. Could you sell a half a roof? Could you split the half a roof? These are all questions that would come up. Just giving you the question, not giving you the answer. So you have to think within the framework of what we learned. The Ramah continues: if there is din chalukah, there were two partners, and they had a property together which has din chalukah, and one sold it to two people, sold his half to two people, or he died and he was moirish to two people, and now there's no more din chalukah in what remained between these two people. One of them doesn't have chalukah. That means this property was owned by Reuven and Shimon. Reuven died. He was moirish to his, and Reuven's chelek would have now is 4/6, let's say. So it had din chalukah. Shimon's chelek was 4/6. Reuven's chelek was 4/6. Reuven died. He had two sons, a bechor and another bechor. The bechor got 4/4, and the other person did not get. His son, Reuven's second son, only got 2/4. So, could he block the chalukah between the two? That means, if Reuven's sons, now if Shimon wants to do chalukah, and he says he says to Reuven's children, I want to do chalukah because I was able to do chalukah with your father. Now that you two are not going to be able to do chalukah, I have who to make chalukah with Reuven's oldest Bechor, and not with Reuven's son, the second one. So I want to do chalukah. Do we say here that since there's one shutaf in this complex, which is not going to get kedei chalukah, is he ma'akev or not? And that's what the Rama says. He's not ma'akev because he cannot have more koyach than the person that they received from. So being that the father was not able to be ma'akev because there was din chalukah, the sons cannot be ma'akev. And therefore Shimon could walk off with his half, and then Reuven's kids, they're stuck as shutfim together because they don't have din chalukah between them. But originally there was din chalukah, so Shimon could separate himself from Reuven's family. And the Reuven's family will they will have to figure it out between themselves. Yeah, and that's the Ulam HaMishpat over here says. Obviously, what the Shulchan Aruch trying to tell you is that the chiddush over here is that even though one of Reuven's kids does have din chalukah and only one of Reuven's kids doesn't, even in such a case, the Reuven's kid cannot be ma'akev. It says if both Reuven's kids don't, let's say Reuven's chelik was 5/4, and he had two kids who yashin it equally. So now none of them are going to be able to, there's no din chalukah over there. He says then, even there, he says that's for sure they can't stop him. He says, the chiddush is that even when Reuven's son one of them does have din chalukah, even there he cannot. That's what the Mishpat says. See if we're going to get to in the next shir. Mr. Hashem, probably tomorrow.